I had always cherished the solitude of being home alone, a rare luxury in the bustling life of a college student sharing a small apartment with two others. So, when my roommates announced they were leaving for a weekend trip, I was elated. The thought of having this entire place to myself, to roam freely without the constant noise and mess, was blissful. Little did I know that this weekend would turn my sanctuary into a haunting nightmare I couldn't escape. The first night was everything I'd hoped for. I cooked myself dinner, watched a couple of movies, and enjoyed the serene silence that enveloped the apartment. It was quite late when I decided to head to bed, the clock striking midnight as I turned off the light and let the darkness of the apartment swallow me whole. That's when the subtle oddities began. Lying in bed, the silence I once found comforting now seemed oppressive, almost charged with a foreboding tension. I tried to brush off the feeling, attributing it to the eerie movies I had indulged in, but sleep eluded me. It was then I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like nails on wood, coming from the living room. My heart skipped a beat, and I told myself it was probably just the building settling or some rodent that had found its way in. Yet, the sound persisted, rhythmic and deliberate. Mustering every ounce of courage, I got out of bed and tiptoed into the living room, armed with nothing but my phone's flashlight. The scratching stopped abruptly as I entered, and I found nothing amiss. Chalking it up to my overreactive imagination, I turned to bed, eventually succumbing to a restless sleep. The next morning, I awoke feeling foolish for letting my fears get the better of me. The daylight brought back the apartment's familiar comfort, and the previous night's events seemed like nothing but a bad dream. I spent the day as planned, indulging my solitude. Yet as night approached, an inexplicable dread began to take hold. Determined not to let fear ruin my evening, I locked all the doors and windows, creating a mental fortress against the outside world. But as darkness enveloped the apartment once more, the scratching returned, louder and more frantic than before. This time, it was accompanied by a soft, whispering voice, calling my name. Sarah. Sarah. Panic gripped me. The voice was coming from inside the apartment, a malicious whisper that seemed to mock my fear. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was paralyzed, a prisoner in my own home. The voice grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was calling me was getting closer. In a moment of desperation, I dialed 911, my voice trembling as I whispered my plight to the operator. "Please, there's someone in my apartment," I begged, the fear evident in my voice. The operator assured me that help was on the way, instructing me to stay on the line and hide until the police arrived. I scrambled to my room, locking the door behind me and sliding under the bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispering continued, now right outside my door, the scratching sounds accompanying it like a sinister symphony. Tears streamed down my face as I lay there, helpless, waiting for what felt like an eternity until the sound of the sirens pierced the night. The police found no sign of forced entry, no evidence of anyone else being in the apartment. They suggested it might have been a prank call or just my imagination running wild. But I knew what I had heard, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Unable to stay another night, I packed a bag and left for a friend's house, glancing back at the apartment that no longer felt like home. It was then I noticed it, a figure, standing in the window of my room, obscured by the darkness, but unmistakably there. My blood ran cold as our eyes met. a paralyzing fear anchoring me to the spot. The figure in the window tilted his head, as if amused by my terror, before vanishing back into the shadows. I turned and ran, not stopping until I reached the safety of my friend's doorstep. I never returned to that apartment alone. My roommates, upon the return, found nothing, and life seemingly returned to normal. But the experience haunted me, a constant reminder that sometimes the most terrifying horrors are those that lurk within the confines of our own homes, unseen, but always felt, waiting for the moment when we're alone to reveal themselves. The moment my parents announced their weekend getaway, leaving me home alone, a thrill of independence surged through me. At 17, I craved these moments of solitude, a break from the constant oversight and the mundane routine of family life. Little did I know that this weekend would unravel the fabric of my reality, leaving me to question everything I believed about my home and myself. The first day passed in a blissful peace. I indulged in all the small freedoms that came with being the sole occupant of the home, blasting music, eating junk food, and enjoyed the silence that only an empty house could offer. As night descended, I settled into the comfort of my room, surrounded by the familiar and the mundane. That's when the anomaly occurred. It started with the lights. One moment my room was bathed in the warm glow of my bedside lamp, and the next plunged into an unnerving darkness. Assuming it was a simple power outage, I reached for my phone, only to find it dead, despite having charged it just hours before. A flicker of unease sparked within me, but I brushed it off, groping in the dark for a flashlight. Armed with my beam of light, I ventured into the hallway, intent on checking the fuse box. That's when I noticed it. The air felt heavier, different, as if charged with a static energy. The familiar layout of my home seemed distorted, hallways stretching longer than memory served. Rooms swapped from their usual places. It was as if the house had taken on a life of its own, reshaping itself under the cloak of darkness. Panic began to claw at the edges of my calm, a sense of being watched creeping over me. I hastened my steps, only to stop dead in my tracks as I heard it, a soft, almost mocking giggle echoing down the hall. The sound was chilling, devoid of warmth or humor, a sinister whisper in the otherwise oppressive silence. My mind raced, logic battling fear. There was no one else in the house, no logical source for the sound, yet there it was again, closer this time, a mocking taunt that sent my nerves on edge. I called out, my voice faltering, "Who's there?" No answer came, only the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The realization hit me. I was not alone. Something, or someone, was with me, an unseen presence that reveled in my growing terror. I turned on my heel, intent on making my escape, only to find my path blocked by a sudden apparition. It was a figure, shrouded in shadows, its features obscured, yet unmistakably human. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling in horror. The figure advanced, its movements silent, ethereal. In a desperate bid for safety, I darted into the nearest room, slamming the door shut and barricaded it with whatever furniture I could muster. My heart pounded against my ribcage, every creak and whisper of the house amplifying my fear. Hours passed, each moment stretching into an eternity of terror. I dared not move, barely breathed, until the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the curtains. With the light came courage, and I ventured forth from my makeshift fortress, finding the house silent and unchanged, as if the night's horror were nothing but a figment of my imagination. Yet, the evidence was there. In the disarray of the room, the dead phone that refused to turn on, and the lingering sense of unease that clung into the air. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of an unseen presence that lingered just beyond the veil of perception. When my parents returned, I said nothing of the night's events, fearing they would just dismiss it as a product of an overreactive imagination. But I knew the truth. Something had visited me that night, something that defied explanation, leaving me with a deep-seated fear of what lies beyond the edges of our understanding. The house never felt the same to me after that weekend. Every shadow seemed to hide secrets, every silence a whisper from the unseen. I learned to live with the fear, but I never again felt truly alone in that house, always aware of the thin veil that separates our world from the ones that lurk just out of sight, waiting for the lights to go out. My parents had gone out for the evening, leaving me with the usual set of instructions that included the stern and by now familiar warning, stay out of the basement. This rule had always ignited my curiosity rather than deterred it. Our basement, according to my parents, was structurally unsound, a hazard zone of sorts, which was why they kept it locked and why I had never seen its interior. That evening, however, the allure of the forbidden proved too strong to resist. I found the hidden key in the usual secret place atop the doorframe, a spot I was sure my parents thought was beyond my reach or imagination. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, I unlocked the basement door and flicked the light switch. Only a single bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered to life, casting a weak glow that did little to penetrate the shadows. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, each step amplifying my sense of dread and anticipation. The air grew colder, the musty smell of disuse and decay becoming more profound. When I reached the bottom, I paused, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. The basement was cluttered with boxes, old furniture, and the usual stuff one might expect. But it was the far corner that drew my attention, where the light didn't quite reach, and where the air seemed to thrum with a palpable sense of something. I approached, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. A door. Not just any door, but a small, crudely made wooden door set into the wall, so well hidden among the shadows that I was surprised I noticed it at all. It was as if the door called to me, a siren song that I couldn't resist. Compelled by a force I couldn't understand, I reached out and opened the door. Beyond lay darkness so complete, so absolute, that it seemed to swallow the weak beam of my flashlight whole. The air that wafted out was colder still, carrying with it a faint, unidentifiable odor that made my stomach churn. I should have turned back then, should have heeded the primal part of my brain, screaming at me to flee. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped forward into the darkness, the door swinging shut behind me with a thud that echoed in the small, enclosed space. That's when I heard it, a soft, wet sound, like something squelching through mud, coming from deeper within the darkness. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief illumination, I caught a glimpse of something that will haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a creature, though to call it such feels inadequate. It was large, its flesh pale and slick, covered in what looked like eyes that blinked and stared from all over its body. It had limbs, too many to be natural, that seemed to both writhe and jerk in movements that defied physics. I screamed, a sound that was swallowed by the oppressive darkness as the creature advanced. I turned to run, but my flashlight died, plunging me into a darkness so complete I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I stumbled blindly, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to get away from that thing. And by some miracle, I found the door and burst through it, slamming it shut behind me, and scrambling to put as much distance between myself and the creature as possible. I didn't stop running until I reached the stairs, and I didn't look back, not even once. When I emerged from the basement, panting and disheveled, the house was still empty. I locked the basement door behind me, returning the key to its hiding place. A part of me still unable to believe what had just happened. I was alone with this terrifying secret, a burden too heavy to bear. I never told my parents what I found that night, and I never ventured into the basement again. But things changed after that encounter. Strange noises would sometimes emanate from beneath the floorboards, and objects would move inexplicably. My parents attributed these encounters to the house settling or to my overreactive imagination, but I knew the truth. Something had been disturbed that night, something ancient and malevolent, and it had taken notice of me. The experience left me with a deep-seated fear of the dark and the unknown, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the things beyond our understanding. I learned to live with the fear, to cope with the knowledge of what lurks in the shadows. But I never again underestimated the dangers of curiosity and the terrifying secrets that can be found in the depth of one's own home.